mention the avalimiter, which probably, I know Don knows about the avalimiter, and Tom and a few of you that have gray hair, but most of you probably don't. It was developed by Peter Lev back in the 80s, and it certainly has some detractors, but maybe a lot of detractors. But there are also a lot of people that think that, like Eric said, pull of the moon may be what tips us over the edge at times. So that was from the 13th. You can see high effect, and on the 14th. So whether that had anything to do with the avalanche or not, I don't know. Now this, I think, is another very important point, and one that Jimmy wanted to emphasize, is about 300 people, I mentioned this before, crossed that traverse prior to the avalanche. A snowboarder on the traverse presumably triggered the slide, but was not caught. And the reason I have presumably up there is because the woman was walking up the slide path. So, I mean, I guess there's some possibility that she triggered it, but Snowbird Ski Patrol does not think so. And one of the reasons they don't think so is that the crown face bisected the compacted traverse. So, what the ski patrollers concluded was that those 300 people that went across that trail over the 3-hour period eroded it, just kept cutting away at the overlying slab, and has since created a shallow trigger point. And because it was getting shallower and shallower, the trigger point was getting shallower and shallower, the traverse, the snowboarder was able to affect the weak layer and trigger the avalanche. So the witnesses, and there were lots of them, said slide started out small and then triggered another larger slide that went all the way to the ground, not far below the ground line. And I think it's interesting that explosives had, so it actually created two fraction lines. Explosives have been deployed near or on both of the crown lines. So I think, hindsight's always 20/20, but this was an avalanche that was about, I think it was unforeseeable and unfortunately probably unavoidable or virtually unavoidable. On the other hand, though, on the 29th of December, and I want you to know, so you don't think I'm picking on Jackson Hole, they gave me these slides. They said they want everybody to know what I'm about to tell you. They want you to know. So I didn't come up with these conclusions. They did. So on the 29th, and I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. Those of you that have been to Jackson, and probably all of you, know at the top of the head wall, top of the gondola, the patrollers ride the gondola, and then they have to hike up the head wall to do avalanche control. And they did that on the 29th. They triggered a slide that deposited 8 feet of debris along, I guess that'd be the west side of the Bridger restaurant building. Lots of activity everywhere. And snow safety director made the decision to run a lot of the routes, including the head wall route, second time. And so two teams, 6 patrollers that had run the original route up on the head wall, went down to the Bridger restaurant. And then there were 4 other ski patrollers standing, or 4 of those 6 people were standing in the corner of the building. 2 people were below the building, kind of in the trees. And then there were 2 ski patrollers up on the head wall that had kind of come up after the other ones had gone down. And I think they were doing that because they wanted to get things done as quickly as possible. They had a number 4 bamboo bomb up there. So this is the head wall. This is where the gondola terminates. Well, the original avalanche occurred right there. Came down toward the restaurant. The ski patrollers have to walk up on a, I guess, moderately safe route up to the top of the head wall and then spread out and do their control. So, the number 4 or 4-pound boot bomb triggered a slide 200 feet away. In fact, the group didn't even know that they had triggered it. 2 ski patrollers that were up there. And remember, we've got 6 people down at the restaurant, and they've just triggered another avalanche on the head wall above them. So, the ski patrollers were kind of, peering around the edge of the restaurant, and one of them saw some, it was a whiteout, one of them saw some trees moving and yelled to his fellow ski patrollers to run, and so they took off along the front of the restaurant. The debris, when it hit the side of the restaurant, it fanned and went around the front. There's a bunch of furniture and ski racks in the debris. Everybody was buried, 3 completely, 1 up to his neck. And this was pretty amazing. There's an additional patroller with a search and rescue dog in the ski patrol room, which those of you that have been at Jackson know, at least up until this year, stuck out into the slide path 30 feet. There was only one way to get into the ski patrol room. That was a door that faced uphill, and no way to get out. Well, he was digging out that door from the original slide, and just kind of had this bad feeling, and went inside, took his dog in, and moments later, this second slide hit the patrol room, or I'm sure he would have been in big trouble. So, and the 2 patrollers below the Bridger restaurant were hit and knocked down. That's the corner of the restaurant. As you all know, it's a lot steeper up there than it looks. That's the first floor. That's where the people were sort of hiding out. And this was the first event that hit the side of the Bridger restaurant. This is the second one from the boot bomb. It was much bigger. It was like twice the size, and they were not anticipating it. I mean, otherwise, obviously, I think they would have been in a more secure location. So it wasn't a post-control release, or maybe it was, but it's definitely a surprise release. So again, 20/20 hindsight. When the Forest Service and Bridger and Jackson Corp agreed on the Bridger restaurant. They had really strident mitigation. But mitigate, that was, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago. But each year, you know, there'd be a little more economic pressure on the ski area, I think. And so mitigation creep sort of followed, I think, this original strident mitigation. And we've already talked about ski patrol building, which was originally supposed to be in the middle of the Bridger restaurant in a very secure location. It was moved out into the path, which originally was just supposed to be a storage area. And then public and employees were allowed up in Bridger restaurant during control. So, you know, they're down in the restaurant, people are doing control above them. So, I mean, obviously, I think economic-driven decisions may have inadvertently created a dangerous environment for the ski patrol. And I think, you know, the pressure to get open may have, well, the ski patrol just plain, you know, they readily admit this and say they employ procedures contrary to standard operating procedures, mainly doing control work above other patrollers and the public. Okay, so following that incident, that's kind of the bad news. The good news is, following that incident, the ski patrol room has been moved to a secure location. No more public up in the Bridger restaurant during control, other than essential employees. And those essential employees include, you know, patrollers necessary for backup, gondola people, and they have to stay in the Bridger restaurant and stay on a back wall, so, you know, pretty safe spot. And this past summer, Jackson has laid down, you know, well over $1 million and put 2 gas X's on the head wall, and a third one is going to be installed this summer. So the gas X's will be able to protect the control teams that are having to walk up the head wall. And I think Jackson Hole and the Forest Service, you know, I mean, that was a mighty close call, have both agreed and come to the decision that public safety and employee safety, and, you know, they're directly related, is job one. So I think, you know, because everything worked out okay in the long run, you know, this has been a good deal both for Jackson and for the Forest Service. So just as a point of interest, I guess, these are the 2 slides that occurred in 2008. This is a slide that occurred in 85, 86, and all the way down into the, almost hit the tram building. Tram is right there. So they were just tiny little avalanches compared to what could have been.
Doug, I think that brings up a good point. Just to, you know, why they built that restaurant there in the first place, knowing the capabilities of that slide path is kind of questionable at best. But when you're doing control work and using explosives, to try to remember what the slide paths are capable of doing, not, you know, historically, slide paths can used to go a lot bigger than a lot of them do now because we do control them, but there are those rare events where they can still go.
I think that's a really, really good event or point. Don?
Doug, it's either 2001 or 2002 that Art Mears and myself were both contracted to look at that situation. Prior to the completion of the restaurant, the gondola at the upper terminal had been completed, and the rest of the footers were in, and cement was poured, but there had not been any structural work done. And Art and I went in on separate occasions with snow on the ground to look at that. And our recommendations, well, first off, we both ascertained, each of us did, that portion of the restaurant was within the trim line of the historic avalanche path there. And of course, these are avalanche tracks that have run historically exactly that, not just avalanche tracks that are responding to control efforts on the part of the ski area. So there was ample evidence that far end of the restaurant was within the avalanche track, and as well as the avalanche stand that had been installed below there for mitigation. So we came up separately, but we agreed with definite mitigation recommendations, which also included, just as you have explained, the ski patrol entrance location, the deck of the restaurant itself, no public in there, no use of the restaurant at night during storm periods because they run people up on the gondola and go to the restaurant. It's a neat place, but none of that. The real root of the problem was that had the gondola design been moved from the base terminal over maybe a half a degree in that length, then they would have had a much safer location for the restaurant and a much safer ability to build their restaurant to the amount of square footage that they figured was going to make it a viable operation. But none of that happened. The gondola was put in, and then they said, now we'll put in a restaurant. And no avalanche considerations were made in that situation at all. So it really came as no surprise to Art and myself at distance. He's got us both of them. When this happened, there was a lot of head scratching going on outside of the immediate area. But it was an incident that was bound to occur.
Yeah, that's a great point, Don. There's a lot of head scratching going on within too, so it wasn't just with that. So, yeah, no, if they followed Don and Art's recommendation, that incident wouldn't have occurred. So, just briefly, this is the National Avalanche Center brief view of snow safety and the Forest Services. We are part of the Forest Service. And, of course, your job as a ski patroller is to reduce risk to its lowest level and get, terrain open as soon as you possibly can. That's a balancing act. Sometimes you're acting at cross purposes, but, that's the job we've got. And avalanche risk can be reduced by early season skier compaction. I mean, we know that, we all know that. But skier compaction in a weak snowpack sometimes increases injury rates, although I think most snow safety people think that it's, worth taking that chance. Boot packing usually works, but sometimes is ineffective, and I think this is really an important point, although I don't know that everybody buys it, but when you have hard layers, like rain crust, sometimes, you think you're breaking down those crusts, but you're not, and Bob Comey, the snow safety director at Jackson, thinks that was one of the factors in the Jackson accident. So, if you're working with hard layers, I guess you need to be extra diligent. Okay, explosives are very reliable, but we all know post-control releases occur. And we often have to deal with atypical and or extraordinary conditions. So, I guess it all boils down to you can reduce danger, but you can never eliminate it. The one thing that Carl and I are really hoping to accomplish in the next year or two is, well, we're working on it right now, and we're hoping that it'll come to some sort of fruition. And that is to get the NSAA, and Scotty has been very instrumental in this, is get the National Skiers Association, the Forest Service, industry in general, support and encourage close analysis of accidents, much like the airline industry does. I mean, we tend to, as a group, as ski patrollers, to look at things, but I don't think that that management does that, and they don't seem to encourage it like, you know, the airline industry does. And there are no laws that says that dictates them or commands them to. So I think it's really important to support workshops like this one. Groups like the NSA Explosives Committee, they've done a great job. Again, workshops like this one, the one in Utah, Colorado, they've all been awesome. Courses like the National Avalanche School and AFPRO, which the reason I mentioned those two is that the National Avalanche School is redirecting its focus. It's just going to be for ski patrollers from here on out. And AFPRO, which is, we all know, is AAA sponsored course, is going to be sort of the graduate level of the National Avalanche School. I think one of the things that I thought Carl was going to talk more about, maybe you are this afternoon, about establishing a post-control release database, and I think that would be really important, as well as, you know, surprise avalanche database. And speaking of post-control releases, please send all your information to this man on the left. So, anyway, stay safe, be careful, and I know you're all too hungry for much discussion, but if anybody has any questions, maybe one question, Scotty, or two.
Doug, a question on the schools, the National Avalanche School and the AFPRO School. Where will the Forest Service administer